Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you inspiring and emotional stories that touch the heart and open the mind. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one of our powerful stories. Today, we bring you a tale that will change the way you look at kindness, assumptions, and the hidden struggles people often carry in silence. This is the story of a billionaire who fired his maid for a single act that seemed unforgivable to him at the moment, only to discover a truth that shattered his pride and brought him to tears. There once lived a man named Richard. Richard was not just wealthy, he was one of the richest men in the city. His business empire stretched across multiple industries, and his luxurious mansion sat atop the hills, overlooking everything below. To many, Richard's life seemed perfect. He had all the money he could ever dream of, he attended lavish parties, and people admired him for his success. But behind the shiny facade, Richard had become cold and detached. His heart had grown hardened by the belief that people only wanted to use him, and trust was something he rarely gave. Working in Richard's mansion was a small team of household staff. Among them was a maid named Clara. Clara was a quiet woman in her late 50s. She had worked for Richard for a little over a year. Unlike some of the other staff members, Clara never spoke much about her personal life. She was diligent, always respectful, and rarely drew attention to herself. But she had a warmth about her, a gentleness that even Richard had noticed on some occasions, though he never admitted it aloud. One evening, Richard returned home earlier than expected from a business trip. As he walked through the quiet halls of his mansion, he decided to head toward the kitchen. That's when he saw Clara. She was standing in front of the massive stainless steel refrigerator. At first, Richard thought nothing of it. Maybe she was cleaning, maybe she was arranging groceries. But then he noticed something that made his blood boil. Clara had quietly opened the fridge and was looking inside. To Richard, this seemed like a betrayal. He immediately assumed the worst, that Clara was sneaking food, stealing from him, or taking advantage of his generosity. In his eyes, this was an unforgivable act. With anger rising in his chest, he stormed into the kitchen. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice thundered. Clara froze, her hand still resting on the fridge door. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with fear. "Sir, she began, but Richard cut her off. "Don't you dare make excuses. I trusted you in my house, and this is how you repay me. Stealing from my fridge. You are fired. Leave immediately." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She tried to explain, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, it's not what you think. I wasn't stealing." But Richard was too furious to listen. He raised his hand, signaling that he didn't want to hear another word. "Get out of my house now. You will receive no recommendation, no second chance. I don't tolerate liars or thieves." Shaking and silent, Clara lowered her head and walked away. She didn't beg again, she didn't shout, she didn't argue. She simply left, her tears quietly falling as she gathered her few belongings and walked out of the mansion she had faithfully cleaned and cared for. Richard felt a strange sense of satisfaction. To him, he had taught a lesson, that betrayal would never be tolerated. Yet, deep down, a faint discomfort tugged at him. Still, he pushed it aside and returned to his routines, never giving Clara another thought. Days turned into weeks. Richard hired a new maid, but something about the house felt different. It lacked the subtle warmth it once had when Clara was there. The meals didn't taste quite the same, the rooms didn't sparkle with the same care, and the silence in the halls felt heavier. Richard noticed but told himself it didn't matter. After all, Clara had tried to steal, or so he believed. One chilly evening, Richard attended a charity gala in the city. It was an event where the wealthy gathered to showcase their donations and network with one another. While mingling with the crowd, Richard's eyes fell upon a small charity booth in the corner of the hall. Unlike the flashy displays of other organizations, this one was simple, almost hidden. Out of curiosity, he walked over. The banner above the booth read, "Feeding Families in Need." Sitting behind the table was a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, sorting through some pamphlets. When Richard approached, she smiled warmly and said, "Good evening, sir. Would you like to learn about our cause?" Richard nodded politely, though he wasn't truly interested. "What exactly do you do?" he asked. The young woman replied, we provide meals and support to families who are struggling, especially those who don't qualify for government aid but still can't make ends meet. Many of the people we help are hardworking individuals who simply don't have enough to feed their children." Something in her words struck a chord with Richard, though he couldn't explain why. He picked up one of the pamphlets and glanced through it. As he was about to leave, he noticed a small board displaying photos of families who had been helped by the charity. His eyes scanned across the faces, until they stopped on one picture that made his heart nearly stop. It was Clara. She was standing with two children, a boy and a girl, both smiling shyly at the camera. Clara's smile was weary but filled with love as she held them close. Beneath the photo was a caption: "A devoted grandmother raising her grandchildren after the tragic loss of their parents. Thanks to your donations, this family now has food and hope." Richard's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the picture, unable to move. The young woman behind the booth noticed his reaction and said softly, "Clara is one of the kindest women we've met. She never asks for anything for herself, only for her grandchildren. She works tirelessly, but it's been hard since her health isn't strong, and she struggles to provide enough food for the children. We've been doing our best to support them." The words hit Richard like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, the memory of Clara standing at his fridge came rushing back. He remembered the fear in her eyes, the tears on her cheeks, the way she had tried to speak but he had silenced her. He realized the truth. Clara hadn't been stealing for herself. She had been desperate, likely checking if there was something she could quietly take home to feed her hungry grandchildren. Shame washed over Richard like a tidal wave. He felt his chest tighten, and for the first time in many years, tears filled his eyes. He had thrown out a woman who had served him faithfully, judged her without listening, and condemned her without mercy. And all along, she had been fighting a silent battle of love and sacrifice, raising two children who had already lost so much. The rest of the gala faded into a blur. Richard couldn't focus on anything else. That night, he went home and sat alone in his grand dining hall, staring at the untouched feast prepared for him. The table was filled with delicacies, but all he could see was Clara's weary face, and all he could hear was the silence of two hungry children waiting at home for food that may never come. The following morning, Richard made a decision. He contacted the charity, asking for Clara's address. At first, they were hesitant, concerned about her privacy, but when Richard explained who he was and what had happened, they eventually agreed to help him reach out. When Richard finally arrived at Clara's small apartment, his heart pounded with guilt and fear. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, it opened. Clara stood there, surprised, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the two children peeked curiously, their eyes wide. Richard swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Clara, I owe you the deepest apology. I was wrong. I judged you without listening, and I treated you unfairly. I saw you in the kitchen that night and thought the worst. But now I know the truth. Please forgive me." Tears filled Clara's eyes again, but this time, they weren't just from pain, they were from the weight of being acknowledged at last. She didn't speak immediately, but the kindness in her heart shone through. "Sir," she said softly, "I wasn't stealing. I would never take for myself. I was only hoping to find something small for the children. They were hungry, and I didn't know what else to do. But I accept your apology. Not for your sake, but because holding on to anger won't feed my grandchildren." Richard broke down. He knelt before her and the children, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, the billionaire's pride was gone. He was just a man who had been blind to the struggles of those around him. From that day forward, Richard's life changed. He not only ensured that Clara and her grandchildren had everything they needed, food, education, healthcare, and a safe home, but he also began funding the charity that had supported her. He used his wealth not just to grow his empire, but to lift up those who had been overlooked and forgotten. And as for Clara, she continued to work, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She accepted Richard's support, but her dignity and humility never wavered. She became a symbol of resilience, love, and quiet strength, not just in Richard's mansion, but in the entire community. Richard often looked back on that night when he fired her and realized it was the moment that changed him forever. The moment when he learned that sometimes, behind what looks like betrayal, there is a story of sacrifice. And sometimes, the ones we dismiss the most are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. This story reminds us all to listen before we judge, to show compassion before we condemn, and to remember that wealth is meaningless if it doesn't bring hope and healing to others. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, sometimes the greatest riches are found not in what we keep, but in what we give.